Welcome to Career Tools. Today's show, the conclusion of our discussion on airline travel basics number 1. Here we go. Okay, so a couple more points worth considering here is sometimes the location you're in is served best by one airline or feeder, but the headquarters of your firm or division is at the hub of another airline.
Yeah.
And sometimes that makes it a little bit more difficult for folks.
Yeah, you need to talk to a frequent flyer at your location. Now, the problem is if they've been with your firm for a long time and you haven't, they're probably going to recommend the airline with the hub where headquarters is, right? If they're a VP and they go back and forth to the headquarters, then they're going to recommend the one with the frequent flyer program that serves the headquarters better than your local consideration. Now, miles tend to expire more quickly now than they used to. So if we had a recommendation to make, we would say choose the best local service provider as long as you know that not every flight you're going to make is going to be into headquarters. And then at some point, you may have to switch allegiance when you finally reach the level where you're starting to fly in and out of headquarters a lot. Frankly, if you fly a lot for 10 years, you can achieve a lifetime status on some airlines that never goes away.
Yeah, the lifetime status never goes away, but I don't know, the longevity of airlines these days.
Well, yeah, that's true. Look, you could make a case that this is a silly cast because who knows what the status of airlines is. But look, I don't believe our economy can function in some ways, even with things like telepresence, without airline flights. And so there's an inherent need for it. And I think when a couple more carriers fail, the carriers that are left will charge more money and they'll figure out a way to be profitable.
Good. Now, all this guidance about picking a primary airline and flying on it almost at all costs goes completely away when we start talking about direct flights, right? Because as everybody knows, a direct flight trumps all.
Yeah, this is, I love it when you do this because it's just so, you're stating what is, there are people who go, oh, good, I'm glad he said that because, of course, I can't believe Mark is flying.
They're going to get disappointed
American here. We do conferences in Atlanta. We have clients in Atlanta. We have our friends. One of my brothers lives in Atlanta. And you think, well, San Antonio to Atlanta, there are great direct flights, fast flights, nonstop to Atlanta on Delta. But folks, listen to us now. As far as choosing an airline, direct flights, nonstop flights are completely and utterly overrated.
What?
Totally, completely.
What?
Yes. And I know in fact, you and I disagree a little bit on this because when you want to fly all the way out to the West Coast, you're like, no, I don't want to stop in Dallas. I don't want to stop in Chicago. Look, if all things being equal, and the point of this cast is all things are not equal, all things being equal, sure, if it's the same price on American or United, why not take the nonstop flight? Sure, totally makes sense. The problem is, if you're building up points on American and you're choosing the United direct flight because it's nonstop, and then you miss building 3,000 miles, actually probably, close to 6,000 miles on American, which with 3 or 4 more of those and a couple other flights thrown in, you're suddenly at gold status on American, which gets you chances to upgrade to first class. If you're choosing the nonstop flight or the direct flight rather than the American flight, the flight on your primary character, you're nuts. Okay. You're right. I agree. You don't have to get off. You don't have to get back on. And there's certainly, if there are 2 flights that you're on versus the nonstop flight, which is only 1 flight, you reduce your risk of cancellation by 50%, right? And look, if we have a choice between a nonstop flight and a flight with a stop on our primary airline, obviously we're going to recommend choosing the nonstop or the direct flight. But choosing a flight that is direct or nonstop, not on your primary airline, to save a few dollars or to avoid the connection is penny wise and pound foolish. Folks, listen to this. This is and I've learned all this stuff the hard way on my own. Almost never in 20 plus years on American, almost never have I had a direct flight. Bizarrely, I've had 10 times the business, 20 to 30 times the business in New York City than I've had in Dallas. Other than work I've had in San Antonio, which of course is just a drive for me, I've had 5 times more work in Seattle than I've had in Dallas, which of course San Antonio to Dallas would be a nonstop and it would be a direct flight. Okay. But on the other hand, I have never had even before my elite status, I've never had trouble that it was born out of a connecting flight, that had I chosen a nonstop flight, it would have made a difference. And look, for the vast majority of us where we are, we don't have the choice all the time of getting a nonstop flight. And so what people do is mistakenly get the impression that, I've got to have a bias toward nonstops. It's so much of a benefit. It's not. You get the benefit on that flight and you lose the benefit of building up a credibility and status on another program.
Right. And here's the point, is that the benefits that accrue to you as a result of being in elite status is much greater than the benefits or the pain avoidance you would have by picking a direct flight.
Yes. Yeah, because that direct flight robs you of the miles, assuming, again, we're comparing a nonstop flight on your non-primary airline to a one-stop flight on your primary airline. You lose the chance to build up credibility, you build up status, and that status will cost you. The lack of status will cost you when you need it most.
Right. And if you're listening to us and you're not a member of a frequent flyer program and you're adamantly disagreeing with us on this point, then you don't get a say, because this is all predicated on the fact that you take our first advice, which is fly on a primary airline. And I guess we ought to state, again, the obvious here, because it's our point too, which is you got to join the frequent flyer program after you pick that airline.
Yeah, look, I'm okay with somebody writing in and saying, this seems pretty simple, right? I mean, gosh, primary, joining the frequent flyer program, it's assumed. Well, we're just trying to be as direct and as simple and as clear as we possibly can be. This is Career Tools. We know that some of our listeners, as I said earlier, are in college. They're at university. They're just starting their professional careers. Folks, you have to join the programs. You can go online and do it. You can call and join, but it can take 30 minutes while you're on hold to get through. If you fly on any airline, there's a form in their in-flight magazine. If you wanted to fill that out and mail it in, you could. Obviously, the best way nowadays is to go online and fill out the form. Look, keep track of your frequent flyer number. Let your agent, let your company, let whomever is booking your flight know what your number is. If you have an assistant, he or she should know your frequent flyer number by heart. Okay. Check your ticket or your emailed itinerary or your receipt to make sure it's on there. If you're uncertain when you check in, as you start flying and it's your systems are not fully in place for handling the process of you flying. And that's what this is. This is a process of you conducting professional business travel. And so you need to have a system for it. And this is what we're going to lay out in a series of casts over the next few years. If you're uncertain, you ask the gate agent, is my frequent flyer number in the system or associated or attached to my record? If not, give them your number. They are eager to put it in because the companies say, please take care of our frequent flyers. And look, we said this earlier. Hopefully this is clear. We admit there's nothing wrong with belonging to every airline's program. Nothing. Every once in a while, you have to fly on some other airline. But it's frankly, I haven't flown on another airline other than American in 5 years, and it may be longer than that. And that's 500,000 miles, which is an enormous amount of status. I know that coming up here, we have to go to a place in Canada that American doesn't serve, but I will do part of the trip on American. So there's all kinds of benefits to joining. It accrues to you directly, and it benefits the company with you getting back on time, saving money, not having to pay change fees in many cases, getting home on a Wednesday night so you can be in first thing Thursday and so on. But folks, you got to join to get the benefits.
Yeah. And then, again, to oversimplifying here and making this absolutely crystal clear, once you join the frequent flyer program, then you have to choose your primary airline every time you can.
Yeah, look, when we book flights, we have to make our preference known. If you make your own travel, whether it's online or with your own agent, it's easy. Sure, you can look at and hear about other airlines to make sure you're not paying $500 more. But if you can get within $100 US, right? What is that? $60 euro, whatever, or, 75 euro and 60, British pounds. It's worth it to choose your primary carrier, provided you have that leeway with the firm who's paying for your travel. And look, if you have your own firm, I encourage you to do this as well. I hate to think that you save $50 here and $50 there. Those are, look, I've had my own firm for years and years and years now, close to 20. And I have to say, there are times when things are tight and you think, geez, I should save $150 $50 by going to this other airline. But if something bad happens and you don't have status, you're going to have a crummy seat coming home, and you may not get on an airplane, and that's going to cost you a hotel, which the company may not have to reimburse you for, particularly if it's a weather delay. And there's all kinds of reasons. So, but if you can get within 100 US, it's worth it to choose your primary character. Our recommendation is that in most situations, if you're the only person who decides your travel, meaning you don't have restrictions to the point of narrowly restricted company guidance, your primary airline is probably worth, get this now, folks, $300 to $500 USD premium per flight. Now, we're making a point there. We're not saying pay $500 more every single time and end up being $25,000 in the red at the end of the year if you have your own company. But if you can get away with it, that kind of difference, there is a benefit there that we cannot tell you how often having status on an airline has saved our tails. Now, what if somebody from the company makes a choice? I think that's what some people are probably thinking. Or if somebody from the company makes a choice or provides options, again, what we have to do is make sure our preference is known. At big companies, it's probably an online form that allows you to list your frequent flyer numbers and your airline preference. At smaller companies, it may just be the president's secretary, right? But you have to let him or her know what your preferences are. I think it's something else related here. I make the point about 300 to 500 USD as a premium that's to give people some idea of if it's $50, you're making a mistake by choosing to go away from your primary airline. But
yeah, you said 300 to 500, but it's most often it's not nearly that much in difference.
Yeah, I think that's the big mistake that people make. Is like, I think people think I'm buying a commodity, and so $2 make a difference. But the whole point of status is you are no longer buying a commodity. You are buying a slice of service that you are going to redeem at some point in the future. The difference between major carriers' prices on most routes is very small. But folks, the person making your travel is probably incented to save those dollars because over hundreds of transactions they do in a day or a week or a month, they really do add up for your firm who's paying that travel provider. And because your firm is sharing some sort of cost structure, that agent is going to be incented to keep costs down. And the systems, I don't know this, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if it's some of the large travel service providers, travel agency provider companies for big firms in the US and overseas. There is a system on the web that when any given agent sees a range of flights from San Jose to Atlanta and back, it captures the airline that they choose and it notes that there was a cheaper one, and that works against them. They are incented to find you the cheaper fare because at this point they work for the company and the company is trying to save money. And there's nothing wrong with the company being incented to save money. The problem with that is the company is essentially saying air travel is a commodity, which is wrong when you think of someone who flies on a regular basis. Again, think about it as putting a down payment on that sliver of service. You'll need it when you're in Des Moines and it's 10 o'clock on a Friday and you need to get home. You can get home if you have status in many cases. So the question is, what do we do? I got to tell you, I'm amazed by this. People don't do this. Before we call corporate travel, before we talk to our boss's admin, we do some simple online research. We check prices. Now, look, those prices that you're going to see at Expedia Orbitz or the other ones, which I never look at anymore, they're likely different than the ones an external provider of travel services gets. And in fact, they may be more than the aggregated price that a Procter & Gamble or a Walmart person might get because they've purchased miles in advance or they have a relationship with a given provider where they share costs or they share benefits or what have you. But the key thing is the relationships between different airlines are almost always quite similar. In other words, if you are seeing that on Orbitz and Expedia, there's a $20 difference between Northwest and Delta, making this up, even though those prices are not the same as your agent will offer you, there'll probably be a difference of about $20 between the price that the agent sees for Northwest than they see for Delta. That means whatever we find online is going to be a good guide to what the agent is going to consider when we're booking the flight. Okay. When we arrange our travel with the agent or with the travel provider or the person in HR or whomever, we let them know what we've discovered. We can consider not only prices, but departure and arrival times. For instance, Hey, I need to do a round trip to San Diego. I can't leave any earlier than X:30 p.m. I need to be out there by X p.m. I know American has a flight that almost works for a little bit less, but I'd prefer the United flight that meets all that criteria. United is a little bit better airline for me, and I have more status. I might get upgraded, and what's more, they'll protect me much more effectively than American will, just because I'm an elite status there.
Right. And the point here is that the person making the travel for you, if you say nothing else, their only consideration is cost. And of course, you have other considerations that, frankly, are just as reasonable and just as valuable and accrue benefits to the company. But unless you say otherwise, cost is the only thing that travel agent is going to take into consideration.
Yeah. Look, their criteria is totally reasonable. We want them incented to save money, but so are our criteria reasonable. Okay. And if their choices are going to have a significant impact on the final outcome, and that's going to affect us, we're going to be the consumer of this service. And when I think of service and commodity, I think of two words at the opposite ends of a spectrum. If we're going to be the ones consuming it, then we ought to be able to provide input, even if we're not given final say. Far too often, when they make a choice and it doesn't include our input, the company benefits to the tune of perhaps $20 or $30 or euros or whatever, but we're going to be left holding the bag during the entire itinerary. Folks, we haven't said this before, but there are buckets of seats on airlines, and every hour or two they change. They're called buckets, which are various fare classes available on any given individual piece of equipment on any given route at any given time of the day. And they're constantly switching based on loads and demand and time of year and all kinds of factors. And those things are all known to them, and you may get the worst bucket in the world, and the agent may be thrilled, and her boss might be thrilled that she saved $150, and you are in seat 32F right next to the whining engine of an MD-80 on American Airlines, and you need to sleep and you can't, and you get home and your spouse is waiting for you to take your turn with a crying baby, and you're irritable, and you have a lousy night at home, and you go to work and you give lousy service the next day at work. You come home and your spouse is upset, all for $150 because we didn't give input. I just think that's, again, penny wise and pound foolish.
Yeah.
And then what's worse is you don't spend the $150, and then because you don't have status and because you're in the wrong bucket and you can't get changed to the flight without that change, suddenly you're spending $150 anyway on a hotel. Crazy. It's crazy.
Right. So let's get to our Career Tools Professional Travel Core principle.
Yeah, look, we saved this background for our final point so that we would get through all the important stuff up front. I know this cast went a little bit long, probably for some people. It was pretty simple up front, and yet there's a lot of rationale for it, and some people are new to this, and we wanted to make it clear to them, and probably some people who've been doing this for a while started out and didn't know what they were doing and stumbled across this, and a little bit of a refresher would help in terms of the why and the background. But we do have a core principle. And just like Manager Tools, Career Tools has solid principles underlying all of our recommendations. When it comes to professional travel, our core travel principle is effective, efficient, and pleasant. We believe at Career Tools that when we travel on business, our first responsibility is to accomplish whatever we are traveling to achieve. Secondly, we have an additional responsibility to do so in a cost-conscious, therefore efficient way. And, folks, nobody else seems to be wanting to talk about this, but because we are away from our families, because travel is inherently difficult and tiring. I landed in San Antonio a couple of hours ago. I got back to Fredericksburg at 9:35, and we're recording this starting at 10 o'clock at night. Because we're away from our families, travel is inherently difficult and tiring, often made more so by an over-focus on efficiency. It's reasonable for us to make it as pleasant as possible and to encourage other people who make decisions that are going to affect us as pleasant as possible as well. These are the things that we start with any of our recommendations. We start with effective, we respect the issue of efficiency, and we believe that pleasantness is a reasonable criteria to add to the mix that we're going to use to make decisions. When it comes to air travel, which is what this cast is about, obviously, there are all kinds of ways that effective, efficient, and pleasant make sense for us and is helpful to us and to the company. and to our clients as well, to our customers. Why create a relationship with one airline? Believe it or not, the people who work at that airline remember travelers. If you travel frequently, they'll remember you. I mean, when I think about it, John and Keith and Margaret with American in San Antonio, they know me. And that translates into them being more willing to use their discretion when I need help. If I traveled on 4 different airlines, all of which are served quite reasonably by in San Antonio, the relationship with them would be 1/4 as strong, which probably wouldn't be enough. And our guidance here is when we travel on one airline, we remember how to make the system help us, because I only have to remember the system that American has. We can remember the phone number to dial from somebody else's phone when our battery on our iPhone or our BlackBerry is dead. Folks, it's happened to me. Airlines store our preferences, so if we forget to communicate them, we have a chance to still get what we wanted. And when you put it all together, effective, efficient, and pleasant is a completely reasonable approach to the travel we're going to do. For many of us, if you're just starting a career, you can assume it's going to be 30 to 40 years of professional business travel. And most people would say that business travel or any travel is not effective, efficient, and pleasant. We think it can be if you apply these simple criteria. And if you're a career tools professional, it will be.
Good. And our steps are pretty easy. Pick a primary airline, join the frequent flyer program of that airline, choose your primary airline and therefore your frequent flyer program every time you can. And remember the Career Tools Professional Travel Core principle: effective, efficient, and pleasant. We understand the need for efficiency, but it can also be pleasant.
Yep.
All right, my friend.
Thanks, partner.
We'll see you. Thanks, everyone. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week. In the meantime, have a great one. So long.